has created a beautiful fusion of a platformer and a card game. I present to you Debate Studios' Wonder Path.
Jag har Jab 8 Studio.
Hi everyone, we're at Debate Studios. We're really excited to share our game with all of you today. I'm Ryan, and I was the producer and sound designer for this project. Alejandro and Nishwant are programmers, and Jason and Aaron are artists. We'll each talk about how they approach the roles in the development of the game, but first we're going to start off this presentation with a short gameplay video. Next slide, please. Wonderpath was our first idea for a possible game. It combines different aspects of two normally distinct genres of video games, being platformers and card games. Although the game itself is primarily a platformer, all of the abilities are tied to a deck with collectible cards rather than the traditional inventory or ability slot. Each time the player uses a card, they use the ability associated with it, and the player draws another random card from their deck to replace it. There are two types of cards, being renewable and single-use ones. Both types of cards are consumed upon use, but the player will re-obtain their renewable cards once they reach a checkpoint. The player is able to buy more cards of both types at a shop using collectible gold. Next slide, please. The card element of Wonderpath encourages both strategic thinking and resource management, while also introducing an RNG element that allows for more variance while replaying levels. Different cards serve a huge variety of purposes, but the player only has access to 3 at a time, and the ones they have will often not be the perfect ones for the situation. The player must make decisions on how to use the cards they are dealt and find imaginative ways to take advantage of the abilities that might first appear suboptimal. The limited nature of cards and the cooldown system means that the player must be careful not to waste them and to keep track of what remains in their deck. This coincides with the theme of our art and sound in the game. We wanted to emphasize exploration and the variety of options available to players rather than combat, which is why Wonderpath has a more lighthearted and adventurous theme. The longer and more challenging levels have multiple possible paths that the player can take, some of which deliberately emphasize one group of cards, being mobility or combat. This forces interesting gameplay by making the players adapt to their hand. Now Alejandro will talk a bit more about the programming of the game. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Ryan. The fundamental aspects of a game are the player movement and card system, so it was important to get it right. With regards to player movement, it was vital to know how we wanted the character to control. We decided to make guard movement snappy so that the player doesn't accidentally fall off a ledge and so that they have greater control. On the contrary, we decided to have a sort of floaty jump. This is helpful so that the player can react to different situations mid-air, such as using cards. As for the other aspect, the card system, we had to make it so that there is always an array of cards that can be removed or added. As you can see on the left, the cards are always active in the scene, but it only shows 3 at a time when inside a level. Now I hand it over to Nishwant to talk more about the game's programming and animations.
Primary focus of the game was on the animations, audio, and UI as a means of immersing the player into the world, which is especially important for platformers where most of the immersion comes from quick responses to player actions. As you can see in the image in the bottom right, the player had over a dozen different animations, each representing a different action the player may make. This brought a lot of difficulty in creating transitions between them because there are so many different possibilities, and also in implementing the sound, where it needs to cut the previous sound off or play alongside it according to the animations. For the UI, a large part of it was making sure that the transitions between scenes worked properly and allowed the player to go to other scenes that may be important at that point in time, like the level victory screen you can see here in the bottom left. Next, we'll have Jason talking about the game's art.
Right, thank you, Nishwan. So an incredibly important aspect of the development of any game is the concept art, since it provides a view into what the game may look like and oftentimes helps set the style, tone, or aesthetic. So here we have some concept art that was used to push this vibrant, playful color palette, which was commonly used by us throughout the asset creation process, evident in these tile textures. On the right, we have some animations of the main character, who was created at a 16 by 16 resolution. A challenge of working with this is adding personality to just a few pixels, so we used various methods to overcome this, such as outlining the character using a contrasting but integrated palette and exaggerating certain movements. Most of the assets entered a shared folder, then were taken directly into Unity by the programmers, resulting in a swift and efficient workflow. Next up, I'll let Aaron discuss other features of the art.
Okay, Aaron wasn't able to make it today, so I will be talking in his place. An important part of the game was other creatures and people, which existed to populate the fictional world of your player. Here on the screen we have the enemies, who are skeletons. The undead are a very common type of enemy seen in video games. We drew inspiration from games like Mario, which have skeleton turtles. This led to us making skeleton enemies in the game. We also decided to make artwork for the instructions and the shop UI, which depict the player resting on his sword and a shopkeeper respectively. We drew some inspiration for the shop and from the one in Undertale. Next up, I will discuss the audio. Next slide, please. The audio of the game is meant to reinforce the playful, quirky, and unique exploration theme of the game. The main music for each level is cheerful and lighthearted rather than being tense or suspenseful like in a dungeon crawler. Karen, if you could play the music track on the top button for us right now, that would be great. In addition to the music, many of the sound effects, including but not limited to healing, victory, and befriending, all use the same 8-bit notes to match the art style of the game. Karen, please play the next two buttons so we can hear some of these sound effects. Those are two of the sound effects for befriending and victory respectively. Next slide, please. Finally, we would like to finish this presentation with acknowledgement. We would like
I have
to
a
thank
question.
you for running this program,
Can you
giving us the
continue
opportunity to meet
to
We would also like to acknowledge Matt, Thomas, Mara, Karen, and Jack for helping us by checking in and giving us suggestions during the development of the game, and all of the TAs and faculty who contested our builds and left us feedback after interim or the first. Thank you.